Welcome back to Kevin Savage TV. My name is Kevin Savage, and today I want to talk about what I think are the 5 most important things for new producers to understand. These things are fundamental, in my opinion, to growing as a producer and really honing in your craft. Without understanding these things, if you're a producer, especially one who's not just making beats on like making loops, but someone who's really also trying to craft their songs in their beats into songs, are super important in understanding. And the first one is what I think is probably most critical, and it's active listening. I think this is the 3rd time that I've kind of talked about active listening on this channel, maybe even 4th time, and it's because of how fundamental active listening is. Now, active listening, as opposed to passive listening, is listening with intention. So you hear something, and rather than just passively hearing it and recognizing it exists and maybe enjoying it in some like deeper kind of emotional level, you actively try to grasp what you're listening to. And that could be everything from listening to how the person creates tension in the track, listening to what sort of instruments are being utilized in the track, listening to how long pieces of the track are, listening to what sort of elements of noise or Foley are being used in the track. Either way, it is listening with an element of intention to better understand the construction of a track. And that is active listening, and it takes time, and it means you're listening to the track over and over and over again. Maybe you're pulling it into the DAW and chopping it up and breaking down pieces, seeing how the track shifts from one piece of the track to another. That is active listening, and I think that is fundamental to growing as a producer. Now, the second thing that I want to talk about is tension and release. And tension and release is intimately tied to your understanding of active listening. Tension and release, in my opinion, is what makes music. Or at least music that we enjoy. Tension and release brings emotion, it brings energy, it brings movement from the beginning of the track to the end of the track. And that's done through changing of hi-hat patterns. That's done through, shifting from quiet to loud and loud to quiet. I think the easiest place to recognize tension and release are in EDM buildups, right? Like that's the most purest kind of obvious form of tension and release, right? They start with just a kick that goes, and then it gets faster, right? And that in itself is tension, and then it does the fill and it releases. So that is fundamental in all music. It's not just in the buildups of a buildup, right? The drums of a buildup. It's there in shifting from the intro to the verse, right? It's maybe starts off a little quiet and it starts to kind of layer and kind of add more pieces in. That's building tension, and you're building tension and building tension until you have a drop or there's a crash. Crashes are a great way of releasing tension. But that is fundamental. Truly understanding the best way and creative ways to build tension and release tension are fundamental to music production and growing as a music producer. Now, outside of those kind of macro pieces that you can utilize, that you should utilize, such as active listening and tension and release, there's some things that are a little bit more narrow. And I think out of all of the pieces in, a DAW, the 3 things that I think are really useful, I mean, there's hundreds of things that are useful. I think everything from understanding music theory to understanding kind of phasing and mono and stereo, the mono and stereo field and how they work and what is mid-side, EQ and stuff like that are powerful. But I think if you're trying to find a place to start and you want a place to really focus and try to learn more about, you can gain the most value in understanding EQ, compression, and reverb. Those have been the most useful for me. I guess limiting you can throw in there as well, but those are probably the things that I use the most and the things that are really important, because if you don't do it right, you could entirely fuck up a track. EQ is really useful because not only it will allow you to isolate pieces of your track, right? And what I mean by that is that often you'll find, as you're producing, that you'll find mud in different pieces. Maybe you've got some mud in the in like a guitar riff, in like the lower end, or you've got some really harsh frequencies. Using EQ and gaining a grasp of how to use EQ, how to move through a spectrum, and understanding where different pieces of your track fall on that sonic spectrum is really important, right? Cutting everything from 35 hertz and below on a kick drum or an 808 is super useful to really bring clarity and punch and honestly benefit your overall sound. You would think, oh, it's my 808, I want it to be low. The reality is you don't want pieces way down there, because no one's going to get anything from them and they're only going to feel the muddiness of that part of your track. Harsher frequencies in like a vocal or in a particular instrument can really sour a track. And so understanding EQ and understanding how to utilize it to your best uses is really, really important as a producer. Simultaneously, reverb, right? Most people will throw reverb. They'll throw reverb presets. I've worked with producers who, one producer says to like the engineer, hey, I just want some reverb on that, and they just throw reverb and a preset on there. And I can understand the temptation to do that. And sometimes that's useful, right? If you don't know how a particular reverb works, reverb plugin works, you probably should just use some of the presets until you grasp that plugin. But you need to grasp that plugin. You need to spend the time learning how that plugin works, understanding how that plugin works. I tend, as someone who uses Ableton a lot, really love just the basic Ableton reverb, but I've also used some of the UAD reverbs and I really like the Fab filter reverbs and the Valhalla reverbs, and so trying to learn how that reverb works is super important, because it'll allow you to fine tune it and it'll prevent your track from becoming just a mess, right? So really understanding reverb and getting to the mature enough point in understanding reverb where you don't overkill your reverb. You don't go to 100% unless you need it, like on a send, is also really important. And really making conscious decisions with your reverb choices is really important. And so that's why I think, honestly, reverb is one of those places where most people probably have a pretty good grasp of it, but especially if you are a new producer, really spend some extra time understanding one specific reverb plugin and really play with it and figure out how to get what you want out of that reverb plugin. And finally, one of the what I find to be one of the most complex plugins in the music producer's arsenal is probably the compression, but it's also one that you should definitely try to learn and understand and grasp, because it could be really powerful in, when it comes to kind of controlling the dynamics and really, controlling the dynamics of your track. And, compression can be really useful in you know, everything from sidechain to gluing to adding a little bit of energy to a master. All of those different pieces, the use of compression is can be used. But it's definitely an art. And I think out of all of those, I mean, obviously reverb, all those things are very artistic, but I think compression is one of the ones that folks tend to feel is more of like a utility or a tool, which is a tool rather than a piece of art. And really mastering compression and listening to the difference of a highly compressed track versus one that's more moderately compressed versus one that is parallel compressed. Trying to understand how that plugin works and how you can make that plugin work in your track is critical. It's absolutely critical. I use it all the time for like parallel bus compression when it comes to my mixes, to really kind of push a track up, you know, push a track up a little bit more in a mix, or adding that, you know, using it as a send and really trying to add a little bit more to kind of fill out a track. Compression is probably going to be the one that you find the most challenging to grasp out of all of them, because you tend to feel it more than you hear it. But maybe you're different. Maybe you're someone who it is easy to grasp and you get it and it makes sense. Either way, it's definitely one that I would spend time trying to understand, and just take the most basic compressor in your DAW. In Ableton, it's just the Ableton compressor and the glue compressor. Just take those compressors and try to learn them. Once you understand those and you get it, then start playing with maybe some of the compressors that are like old school, like analog compressors and stuff like that, because at that point you'll get it. And another powerful thing with like the Ableton compressor is there's a visual component that some of the more analog style compressors don't have, which maybe that's good. Maybe using the analog ones where you just hear it, you don't see anything on there, can have value. Either way, really try to understand what it means to like increase the ratios or the attack or release or stuff like that, before just buying a handful of compressors. Well, those were the things that I think are the most useful to really kind of nailing it as a producer when it comes to, you know, especially if you're a new producer. So I hope that these made sense. And if you have any questions or you have any thoughts, be sure to leave them in the comments below. And we'll see you in the next video. Peace.